Hello, welcome to the webinar. I'm Paul Hallett. I'm president of the British Society of Soil Science, and I'm really pleased to invite all of you to the fifth webinar of the year. Now, before I welcome all the presenters, I just want to introduce the British Society of Soil Science, and we are the hosts of today's webinar. So we're an established international membership organization and charity, and all of our work is committed to the study of soil in its widest aspects. And you'll see that in the talks you're listening to today. So we bring together those working within academia and science, and also we have a growing membership amongst practitioners who implement soil science in industry and those with a keen interest in soils as well. So this year we plan to host 10 webinars. So this is the fifth one. So please keep an eye out on the website for any further details of ones that are coming up. Now, before we begin, just some basic housekeeping. There's a lot of you here today, so all your microphones have been muted. We are taking questions during the talks, but at the end of the presentations, we will be presenting these to both speakers. So please submit any questions you have by 10:50 a.m. and that'll allow us to get through as many as possible during the Q&A session. The other thing is that today's presentation has been awarded BASIS and NRO SO CPD points. So if you're registered with either body, please contact us directly after the event and we can get that registered. Finally, please be aware that we are recording today's presentation and it will be available to watch in the future as well. So today we've got two really exciting talks, and they feature two very exciting papers from the European Journal of Soil Science. So the European Journal of Soil Science is one of the British Society of Soil Science journals, along with Soil Use and Management. Last year, it celebrated its 75th anniversary, and the work that is prepared in that or presented in that journal is really dedicated to advancing the theoretical and mechanistic understanding of soil properties and processes. It covers everything from right down to the molecule, right up to global scales. We look at any type of ecosystem, whether it be managed or natural. If you want to see more information on that journal and how to submit an article, you can check out the BS Cubed website on that. So the first presenter today is Dr. Laura Bentley. So Laura will be speaking about a recently accepted paper that's soon to appear in the European Journal of Soil Science, titled First Signs that National Cropland Organic Carbon Loss is Reversing in British Topsoils. So a highly impactful study. And Laura is a spatial and environmental scientist at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. And she is interested in the efficacy of land management policies for carbon sequestration and their long-term viability. Laura is also the theme lead for the UKCEH Countryside Survey Soils Program and the lead data analyst for soil and freshwater research themes of the Environment and Rural Affairs Monitoring and Modeling Program. National Field Survey as well. So she's in charge of generating a lot of the great soils data that we have for the UK. So I'll pass over to Laura, who will now present her talk on this fascinating paper.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for that lovely introduction. I will just share my slides and then hopefully they will come up for you all. Okay, that should be visible now. I am presenting this work on behalf of a much wider team that works on our national monitoring at UKCEH. And yep, hopefully the paper will be visible. Oh, no, I can't see the messages in chat. Well, I'm just going to plow on and hopefully this is working. Yeah, so and the paper covering this research will be out shortly. So just to give a brief overview of what we're actually going to talk about today, we're obviously going to go over the updates to what these new national trends for cropland soil carbon are in Great Britain based on the Countryside Survey data set. But within that, I also want to take some time to talk about the why and how of how we do national monitoring for soils, then obviously what the new trends say, and then what that might mean. So to start with, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but croplands are in quite intensively managed systems. There's a lot of disturbance, high rates of erosion, and biomass removal. And the long and short of that is they do tend to lose carbon quite significantly over time as a result of disturbance, at least under conventional management. And that has very much been the historical trend, with Countryside Survey data from 1978 through to 2007 showing that croplands in Great Britain lost 11% of topsoil organic carbon in both stocks and concentrations over that period. And similar differences were also found from the NSI dataset produced by Cranfield and published in this Bellamy paper in 2005, although the magnitudes of difference did vary between those two studies. So we know we're losing this carbon, and that is a problem for a number of reasons. Not only because the amount of organic carbon in soils supports a number of soil functions, including productivity, but also a number of other sub-functions that soils support. And so there's been a lot of interest in how we can potentially reverse that trend using sustainable land management techniques. And that is partly to restore the functionality of soils where we're losing a lot of that organic carbon. For example, the 4 per thousand initiative, which was released quite a while ago now, but published that essentially is the aim to restore 0.4% of soil carbon per year up to 2050 to restore soil functionality. But then also increasingly there's interest in this space for the purposes of carbon sequestration, so pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, storing it in arable soils as a sort of which have a degraded baseline in order to help combat climate change. Now, there's been a lot of quite well-founded critique about the feasibility of achieving this, especially at scale, but in particular, the challenges of achieving genuine long-term additionality in terms of carbon sequestration. So pulling genuinely additional carbon out of the atmosphere, storing it in soils, in croplands, and keeping it there is quite a challenge. That being said, there have been a number of studies that have, especially at field trial level, showing that this can be possible with sustainable land management to some degree, mainly the increasing carbon stocks in soil in particular, which is different to long-term carbon sequestration, which implies a sort of permanence. But we can see stocks increase with sustainable land management. And there's a table here pulled from a report by the ERAMMP project for Welsh Government, summarising the potentials of sustainable land management to increase carbon stocks and produce, as far as we can tell, long-term stable sequestration to different degrees based on different managements. And the numbers in the table are in tons of CO2 per hectare per year, but I've converted those to tons of carbon just so you can get your eye in, because those are the numbers we're going to look at in the rest of the talk. So you can see the magnitudes are varying between about sort of 0.1 ton per hectare per year up to, 0.7 or and those numbers are, the median of a range. So in some studies, you're seeing much higher than that. And that report is available online if you're interested more in that context. It's work led by Bridget Emmett, but a number of other colleagues, including Pete Smith and others from other organisations. So we think that sustainable land management can have an impact, but before we get into the uptakes of, looking at what has happened at a national scale, it's worth considering whether the amount of SLM being implemented in GB has changed over time. Now, it's really hard to get a cohesive evidence base for this, especially at national scales. It's often very limited what data is available. And we know that policy levers are being rolled out now to incentivize things like sustainable land management for soil health through programs like the Environmental Land Management Scheme in England, through the Glacier Scheme in Wales, and now the Sustainable Farm Management Scheme. But those are relatively recent in the scale of the time series we're looking at. But there are also studies showing that there is a really high interest and high rates of uptake in SLM among some farmers in the UK over, say, the last 15 years. And that is reflected in a lot of the media and resources that are now out there to support these kind of activities, including a movie that was released last year, 6 Inches of Soil, on the topic of the importance of soil for farming. And some of this data includes that since the 1980s, we've seen an increase in the number of farmers in the UK practicing some form of reduced tillage, up from 25% to roughly 40% now. We've seen that rates of straw removal in the UK peaked in the 1990s, and so that's now declining, showing that more straw is now being incorporated back into the field. And a survey done in the early 2020s found that 92% of about 600 farmers who were consulted consider themselves to be practicing some form of sustainable soil management, with the most frequent used practices being manure application, cover crops, diversified rotations, but there was a lot of different diversity in those practices. So the big picture does seem to be there has been some uptake in this, and there is a lot of dynamism in this space. But obviously, whether that is enough or has been enough to actually impact national trends is a really important question to look at, and take those kind of look at information at that national scale that is really important for policy and yeah, how we move forwards in this space. So that brings us on to national monitoring, naturally. And we're going to be talking about data from the Countryside Survey here, but I just wanted to emphasize there are a number of other national monitoring programs going on in this space, including the ERAMMP National Survey and Countryside Survey Northern Ireland, which are both run by colleagues at UKCEH as well. But also we have the NSI survey that was run by Cranfield, and the NSIS survey in Scotland, the National Soil Inventory Scotland, associated with the James Hutton Institute, neither of which I believe are planned to update soon, but they have really valuable data in there as well. And then, of course, we have the England Ecosystem Survey, which is just sort of rolling up its first sort of baseline survey with many organisations involved in that as well. So there's lots of national data out there to use for this kind of things, but the Countryside Survey currently has the longest baseline that is also presently active. And the purpose of this survey is to provide information on the condition of the natural environment and how it's changed over time at a national scale critically. So we are looking at national scales. Has 5 decades of monitoring, which allows us to put current condition in a really important context. But it also takes an integrated monitoring approach, which means all of our measurements are spatially co-located for a range of metrics. So we collect plant, vegetation and botanical data at the same place of all of our soil samples. And that gives us a lot of analytical power to address the core questions that the program looks at, which is not only what has changed at a national scale, but whether those changes matter. But then we can also get into looking at what are the drivers of those change through those strong spatial links between our metrics. And if this is of interest to you, I really recommend you go and have a look at the paper that David Robinson had published last year in the European Journal of Soil Science that really digs into the underlying ethos of the Countryside Survey and the national monitoring that we do. So I do think it is worth dwelling a little bit on how the survey is designed, because it is important to understanding the results. So the Countryside Survey takes a stratified random sampling approach. Now, what does that mean? Well, it basically means that back in 1978, Bob Bunce designed an approach where Great Britain was divided up into a number of different discrete categories based on aspects of the environment that define major axes of variation, so things like parent material and climate, that underpin environmental variability, but also static through time. And then what we do is we go out and we sample each of those classes randomly, but proportionally to its area. And what that means is that the overall sample, once you put it back together, is nationally representative, but it's also ensuring we're able to capture that variability across those across those different land classes. And the reason we do that is partly because it ensures that we do capture that variability, but we're also able to do it with less sampling effort than we would if we did a purely random sample. But it also gives us a lot of power to potentially expand and contract the survey as needed and refocus some of those categories over time as policy needs changes without compromising the integrity of the sampling. And that has happened over time. We have added more squares largely in 2007, and some of those land classes have been subdivided to meet policy requirements for reporting, but we're able to use the analytical approaches we implement to account for that and ensure that we have consistent reporting through time. So the fundamental sampling unit here is a 1 kilometre square, and within that we have 5 soil sampling plots that provide replication. And we're now on a rolling survey design, so it completes every 5 years. So we're currently in a cycle from 2024 to 2028, so there will be more data coming out and other updates in the near future. So do look out for those as well. Getting onto the actual soil sampling methodology that we use, so it is topsoil only, so 0 to 15 centimetres in this case. And it is an important difference to some of the other national surveys. We don't bulk sample the soils at plots, which means we aren't collecting a large number of plot samples, at a plot and combining them together. We're taking a single core. And the reason for that is because the focus is reporting at national scale. So we're not trying to really accurately quantify exactly the properties of each field. And what that does is it does introduce more noise on resampling when you revisit a site, but that is counteracted by a lot of procedures we have to ensure accurate relocation. But So it adds noise to the data set, it doesn't add bias. But the real benefit is it allows us to have really precisely co-located and paired metrics within an individual soil core and with the paired vegetation above it, which the second you start to combine multiple cores together, you start to dilute those relationships if they are non-linearly related. So we do collect, although we do our analyses on one core, I do also want to mention that we collect additional cores at each of our plots to go to the National UKCEH Soil Archive. So there are archived, dried and frozen soils for all of these sites through time available for people to apply to use. And over the history of the survey, we've collected national data sets for over 100 different indicators of various things that complete at a national scale that's also published and available for people to use. Oh, yes. I don't know why there's an animation on that picture, but this is Michele, one of our very valued lab techs who we do all of our analysis in-house, and he is, working away. So how do we actually measure soil organic carbon? So we measure it in this case by loss on ignition, which is measuring the amount of organic matter in soil, and then we use a correction factor based on data from the Countryside Survey to correct that to carbon concentration. Carbon stock is then measured by the combination of bulk density and carbon concentration together to give you amount of carbon in a volume, with a correction factor accounting for the size of the core to get you tons per hectare. So the reason we use loss on ignition is because this has been consistently measured from 1978, whereas total carbon, which is often used these days, was only introduced in Countryside Survey in 1998. We have that data for half of 2007 as well, not all of it, but we do also collect it now for all of our samples. So this means that although it's not the best for long-term national reporting in this data set, we are able to use the total carbon data to continually check that initial correction factor of 0.55 is appropriate. And we do that every roll and for each habitat to make sure that that's the case. And now there's a number of nuances to, this is the only bit of stats in the presentation, so apologies for those who don't like this kind of thing, but there are a number of complexities that the History of the Countryside Survey introduces for analysis, but we're able to use the mixed effects modeling approach that we have to handle those and provide consistent national estimates through time. So those three challenges that come in through the survey design are the fact that we have changing population sizes over time, partly because new sites were added in from 2007 to address new policy questions, but also plots will come in and out of the survey with changing landowner permissions, because all of this is supported by landowners who agree to let us onto their land and are integral to all of this working. So you have a population, as you can see in this figure in the right, on the right, where some sites are reported in both surveys, majority most of the time, but you also have some sites that will only be recorded in one survey, some sites will only be recorded in another, and that makes it a challenge if you use simple sort of mathematical methods to summarize what the condition is in survey A and survey B, but then you also want to use a consistent population to report on change. So that's a challenge. We also have a spatially hierarchical structure in the way we sample the data, and of course there's temporal autocorrelation potentially at play here. So the mixed effects modeling approach that we use is able to account for these things. So we have a random effects structure that accounts for the spatial hierarchy, and we include an AR1 temporal autocorrelation structure to account for the temporal autocorrelation. And then through this mixed effects structure, what happens is, because you have these random effect structures and autocorrelation structures, that the model understands the structure of the data, it's able to correct the estimands that we get for any individual cycle for the sort of maximum population size that we survey. And what that means is if you're missing a plot in 1 year, that isn't going to bias your estimate of the mean in that year, because the model accounts for that when it gives you its model estimates at the end. And this approach is explained in detail in the Scott et al. 2008 report that for the Countryside Survey, but also the method was introduced way back in 1997. And I can share these papers if anyone's interested. But yeah, so that's how we go about it. So even though the population size has changed, we are getting consistent estimates through time. All right, on to the actual results, which is the sort of exciting part of the talk. So what we do see in the current analysis is we recapture this, is we still see the continued loss of soil organic carbon concentration and stock to 2007. But what we are now seeing since then is that there has been a significant increase in both carbon concentrations and stocks for arable and horticultural soils in Great Britain. Now you can see this table on the right. We extract whether these changes are significant from the model itself, but we've also run bootstrapping on all of this just as an additional layer of verification, which is standard practice for the Countryside Survey, but also adds that additional assurance that what we're seeing is really there. So this is really interesting because what we're actually seeing now is that approximately half of the total loss from 1978 to 2007 has actually reversed. So we're getting a significant increase of about 2.1, about 2 grams per kilogram in terms of concentration from 2007 to present, and 2.4 tons per hectare increase from 2007 to present in carbon stocks. So this brings up a lot of follow-up questions. And the first one we wanted to ask was, well, how has bog density changed? So the density of soil over that period, which is of course part of the calculation of carbon stock. And what we see is that there has been a significant decrease in bog density over that same period. This is something you would expect to see with an increase in organic matter in soil, so that is consistent. And it also suggests reinforces that increase in carbon stock we see is being driven by an increase in carbon concentration, despite a decrease in bog density. The second question is, well, is it possible that land use change is happening here and driving some of these trends? And the answer is no. So we reran this analysis using all sites with cropland data in the Countryside Survey, but then we also looked at it for sites that we found are consistently cropland over time, and we get exactly the same results, and those are in the paper. But what this doesn't tell us about is changes to, for example, rotational management in between survey visits. That is a really important caveat and might be an important factor driving these results. So what does this mean? Well, it seems to be the first evidence that we're aware of that a trend of losing cropland stock can be reversed at a nationally significant scale, which is really exciting. It's a really positive sign for repairing cropland functionality in Great Britain, but as a really important caveat, it is unclear at the moment what this means for carbon sequestration, as we have no way of verifying what the source of the additional carbon in the soil is or whether it will be preserved long term. It's possible that to some extent we have some vertical redistribution of carbon happening, especially if changes in tillage are occurring in the system. And it's also possible that there's geographical distribution of stock, for example, if we're getting more organic manures applied to cropland rather than other places. So what this means for carbon sequestration is really a question at the moment that we can't answer with the current data. But just to emphasize, the observed rate of increasing soil organic carbon stocks we're seeing at the moment is about 0.34% per year, which is actually relatively close to the 4 per thousand goal, which I think is quite exciting in a way. So we're seeing a change from a long-term rate of decrease of about 0.6 tons per hectare to now an increase of about 0.17 tons per hectare per year for now, and based on the current data. So next steps for all of this, well, the paper is due to come out in EGSS very soon, and we're really interested in trying to understand what potential managements are underpinning this. But as I said at the very beginning, it's really hard to get data for the sites, especially that's temporally consistent over the timescales we're interested in the Countryside Survey. But some of the things we're currently looking at include whether there are other trends we can detect in our co-located metrics that provide insights into what's going on. We're really interested in using satellite data going forwards to understand changes in rotations between our survey visits and cover crop usage going forward, and hope that can help us pick apart the picture. We're also interested in looking at how much of this carbon increase is in the mineral associated versus particulate organic fractions, as that will help us understand the significance of what we're seeing. And there's also a follow-up question to all of this, which is understanding why the trends we see for Great Britain, which are frankly dominated by English soils, in croplands in particular, are so different to what we see in Wales from the ERAMMP national monitoring, from the national report that was published a month ago or so, which actually sees a continued decrease in carbon stocks for croplands in Wales. So that report is also available online if you're interested, but that's a major area of interest to us, is trying to understand what's driving these changes across the full environmental gradient. And that's it from me. So huge thank you for tuning in, and huge thank you to the team that's worked on this behind the scenes, and all the authors who are listed on the start slide. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Laura. That was fascinating. And we're going to get a heap of questions, I think, on it. And also, I expect that paper is going to get highly cited as well. So just to remind everyone, we're taking questions at the end of the second presentation. So if you have any questions at all, please put them into the question box by 10:50. I can see a few questions have come up already. I want to introduce you now to our second presenter. He's speaking to us all the way from Sydney, Australia, and it is Professor Budiman Minasny, and he will be speaking on a recently published paper on machine learning and artificial intelligence applications in soil science. So Budiman is a professor in soil landscape modeling at the University of Sydney. He's really passionate about the role of soil in managing climate change, food, water, energy security, and maintaining biodiversity as well. So he's got more than 160 journal publications. He's recognized as a leader in digital soil mapping and modeling, and he's used a breakthrough in soil mapping and modeling techniques to unlock fundamental new knowledge urgently needed to protect and enhance soil carbon stocks and to sustain agriculture and ecosystems worldwide. So I'm going to pass over to Budiman, where it is, I think, 7:30 for him at the moment. Okay, over to you, Budiman.
Okay, thank you everyone, and good morning. So my name is Budiman Minasny. Good evening from Sydney. So I'd like to acknowledge my co-author Alex McBradney. So I guess the paper that we're talking about is applications of machine learning and AI in soil science. The background why we wrote that paper is late last year. As we know, there is a Nobel Prize in physics that was announced late last year for John Hopfield and Jeff Hinton for the foundational discoveries and inventions that enable machine learning with artificial neural networks. So I was quite very excited about it because I think this is one of the few times that a Nobel Prize winner has something to do with soil science, which I'll explain later. So Hopfield and Hinton got awarded because of their work in neural networks. So from early on, that scientists or mathematicians and statisticians and physical scientists try to understand how the brain works and how we can encode it into computer programs. So one of the earliest work is just trying to encode the neuron and the synapses into a node and the value attached to it, whether a higher value or lower value that makes it stronger and weaker. So I'll talk a little bit about the past and then the current and then the future applications of AI in soil science. So hope you'll figure out that if these nodes that you see, that if they are connected together, and each of these connection, if you give it a value or a weight, that you can do simulate some kind of a network that can encode some of the signals. And then this network has been improved by Hinton using what is called a Boltzmann machine, that if all of those nodes can be connected, then all of them can talk together and simulate some how the brain works. And this is all been refined until what we have as what we call this network, what is called as a multi-layer perceptron, or the neural network as we know today. So in the 1990s, artificial neural networks become an application. Why? Because nowadays, at that time, the computer programs have been made that allow the simulation or optimization of the neural networks. So this is an earliest, I think, one of the earliest paper that really in soil science that's apply neural networks for soil prediction. So at that time, it's called pedal transfer functions, and there was an interest in using artificial neural networks to estimate soil water retention from easily measurable data. So these forms of neural network, as I said before, is a multi-layer perceptron. That means that all of these nodes, we can encode it from an input value. If we can provide an input value, for example, sand, silt, clay, and whatever it is, and then there's some hidden layer or hidden nodes that are simulating how these nodes or the neurons works, that if we can encode it and we can give weights to all of these connections, we can actually make the input variables into output values that we wish to predict. And even at that time, Yakov Chepsky from USDA ARS, he said that we should have some control about these neural networks. For example, grouping the soil samples by the genetic horizons can improve the precision of the estimates. And over time, there are applications of neural networks in soil science or in soils. This is the number of papers showing how many papers has been published that use or utilize neural networks in soil application. It has increased, but the increase is more recently is, I think, after 2010 and also after 2017. But the increase is not as fast as other machine learning models. For example, a competitive machine learning model that everyone knows and everyone uses called random forest is really takes off for soil science because of the easiness or the readily available algorithms that works that you just plug in a number and it runs and it works most of the times. But around 2017, there is a real increase in the interest of using neural networks. This is because of in the 2010s, there's an algorithm called deep learning. So the deep learning goes beyond the usual neural networks that it can actually recognize image. And in fact, this is one of the fundamental algorithms that your phone apps or whatever apps you're using that it can recognize a person's face from the pictures. Because how can we let the machine learn how to recognize image? So the deep learning method, one of the methods is called a convolutional neural networks, which takes an image and then run through a filter in a size of a kernel and then encode it into a value, and that value is got to pass through several filters, and at the end it got flattened into values that are encoding this image into values that can be represented by the neural networks again. And then we can see that the final end is just a simple neural networks with different layers. So the neural networks is quite powerful that from a simple input and output value, we can also use image as inputs to be able to allow us to make prediction, for example, recognizing image or other things that people have used it now in soil science, for example, recognizing roots from the 3D scan and so on. So in our work, we usually collect a lot of infrared spectra from the soil, and the infrared spectra of the soil contains thousands of variables or reflectance of the soil, variables over different spectra, from the visible to the near infrared to the mid infrared. So we can use this kind of convolutional neural networks because this is similar to a signal, for example, a voice signal or other signals that the convolutional neural networks is very powerful to do. So by using that kind of a similar structure, we are able to use the tools that people use for signal processing and make a prediction of soil properties from a single spectrum. So now I'm going to talk about what do we mean by the AI, and then what do we mean AI and what do we mean by machine learning. So what I've discussed so far is more of the machine learning. Machine learning, that means that machine or algorithms that can recognize patterns from the data. But machine learning is part of a larger, what we call as artificial intelligence. So there are many definitions. So the definition that we like is the one that says that the science and engineering of making intelligent machines, especially intelligent computer programs. So what do we mean by intelligent computer programs? So the author, Yuval Noah Harari, says that AI is an agent, not just a tool, right? So unlike previous technology, it's not just a tools that we use, but it can be an independent agent capable of making decisions and creating new ideas on its own. So what do we mean by capable of making decisions and creating new ideas? Let's explore it. So we all know that ChatGPT is being released in November 2022. And many people, including me, are very curious of what it can do for us and what it can do for soil science. So since 2022, since ChatGPT released, there have been also many papers published around AI. It's usually around automation of tasks. Some use it for educational applications, some doing research on ethical considerations, perceptions, performance, and evaluation. But one particular study from recently is by Kanifa. So he evaluated how the AI, if he gave them the exam questions of a postgraduate exam questions in soil science, this is in Iran. So he evaluated several large language models, including ChatGPT and so on. And what he found is that the large language models can only answer correctly a maximum of 65% of what's considered as advanced questions. It's not bad, but I think that there's still it's not the best options if you want to use AI to answer soil science questions. So what currently we have is using AI is more of what we call as a pattern recognition, learning from data, or more of it machine learning. So it includes digital soil mapping and soil spectroscopy. And also some are used in soil microbiome analysis in bioinformatics and so on. So, but what I want to share with you, what could be possible 3 applications for the future or for current of what AI can do for soil science to simplify or to help us with our research. One of it is to extract information from papers and reports. So most of the time we have soil survey reports, and it sits somewhere in the library or is available in someone's office, and there's lots of information in there, but how do we actually extract some information from that? So one particular tool is called topic modeling. So it's just like clustering, but for text data. So what this does is that the algorithm reads the paper and then group them by the same co-occurrence of words. By then, you are able to group the occurrence of word or the topics of similar words in order to summarize what's happening, what's behind the literature. So this is just an example, the work we done a few years ago. So we want to know what are the machine learning applications in soil science. So rather reading all this paper one by one and classifying, we use the topic modeling to read the paper and classify them and group them into groups. So for example, machine learning has been used a lot in spectroscopy. That is topic number 8. Why we say it's spectroscopy? Because the topic or the keywords that it presents is for spectra, the calibration, the reflectance, and so on. So topic modelings allow us to summarize from a large literature. But it's not just about summarizing those large literature or the topic, but you can actually extract information from the text. And there's another tool that people use is the natural language processing. So how do we convert the text into something that can be searched on and something that can be related together? So this is an example where they try to extract information from the scientific literature and to see how of these different variables, for example, fertilizer, manure, and how does it affect aggregate stability and so on, just from the literature. So rather than doing this manually, you can actually ask the topic modeling, not the topic modeling, the natural language processing to extract those information. So I think this is a very powerful tool, because to go through the literature, it's a very time-consuming task, and all those reports from survey and from research and so on, if the topic modeling and the natural language processing can extract that information, that would be very useful to enrich our database. The next one, I will talk about soil self-learning sensors. What do I mean by self-learning sensors? We know that we can measure soil water content using a sensor. We install a sensor, it measures the water content, and you can look it up through the web application and so on. But can we actually make the sensors learn from the data? So usually if you want to forecast the water content in the soil, we need to use some kind of models, either empirical models that learn from the data or some kind of mechanistic model. So what we can do is we actually use the data itself and learns from the data. This is just an example that we try to simulate how it learns from the data. So initially, this is starting from the point that we have no information at all. We just install our probes, and we use an Australian model. That means the model that we calibrated from somewhere else. And we try to predict the moisture content 1 day ahead. And of course, it doesn't work because it's not calibrated against this model. But over time, every 30 days, we fed that data that has been collected into the model and retrain them, not retrain them, but update the model, update the parameters. So over time, we can see that over time, when the model has seen enough data, then it would able to predict the water content at that site because it has learned about the condition of that data. So rather than trying to use other models, or rather trying to use pre-made models, we can actually make the sensor itself learn from the data. This is just an example. It's not perfect yet. We'll try to make it better. So this is another example where we try to do a forecast next 7 days ahead and so on. So the robotics has become available, and robotics attached to the sensor is also possible. So how can we use it to sample the soil? So you can say that it can just sample every 10 meters or every 1 meter, but probably that's not the best way to sample or get information about the soil if there are some hotspots in the area. For example, in contaminated sites, you want to focus on the hotspots rather than creating a grid of the data. So one way of doing it is this called adaptive sampling, so that it updates itself about the information as it gathers the data, and try to zoom in or try to go around to see more of the hotspot rather than trying to go around and make a dense grid and so on. And finally, just a bit of forward thinking that can we use an AI agent for hypothesis generation? So this has attracted a lot of attention recently. So it's been called AI scientists or AI co-scientists. So, for example, there's a website that says that it can fully automate the open-ended scientific discovery, and Google has released this AI co-scientists that can accelerate scientific breakthrough. So can scientists, real scientists like us, the soil scientists, pose the research questions to the AI, and can AI help design experiments and so on? So we experiment with this, and this is what is now known as a multi-agent AI. So the AI is not a single software or single system, but it can be multi-agent system. It can be multi-agent system. That means we can have multiple AI which we can assign a different task. So, for example, in this example, I can have an agent that does a literature review, an agent that does the data analysis, and an agent that looks into the database, and they can work independently and work also collaboratively. and they can do data or collect basic information that is going to pass through a different scientist agent. So this is an agent on an AI. So for example, agent X could be specialized in soil chemistry, agent Y could be specialized in biology, and so on. So each can work independently or collaboratively and synthesize what's happening in the literature to propose some ideas or hypotheses. These ideas and hypotheses can be critiqued and can be evaluated by other agents. It can be agents that reflect about how feasible it is. It can be a critical agent to look how the proposal or the hypothesis align with the current scientific information or knowledge. It could be a proximity agent that sees whether those hypotheses can be grouped together. Are there redundant hypotheses? There could be rank, and it could be a review, and this could be a feedback loop between the AI system and the real scientists. So is it feasible? Is it possible? So we do a trial. For example, we want to know that as we know, as Laura has mentioned, that this is nowadays we are more interested in the mineral associated organic carbon in the soil because it is one of the organic carbon forms that are more persistent or stays longer in the soil. So I pass an agent and I says that what are the research strategies? Can we design a research so that we can find how or what's the best way of increasing mineral associated organic carbon in the soil? So the multi-agent works, and then it proposes what are the research objectives, for example, to quantify the potential and so on. So the agent comes up with some conceptual framework to do with the minerals, to do with the microbial processes, the plant-soil interactions, and environmental factors to look up how we can research into the mineral-associated organic carbon in the soil. The research approaches could be field experiments, laboratory studies, modeling, and analytical methods. And most of it, all of this, surprisingly, are what we know in the literature and what we would, as scientists, do in a research proposal, and to see how the feasibility as well. So we inquire the AI agent further. So are there other interdisciplinary inspiration or key concepts that we can use from other disciplines to help us with the mineral associated carbon rather than looking in the soil science literature? And the AI agent help us look into areas in, for example, material science, bioengineering, marine science, chemistry, and it comes up with proposals such as engineered interfaces and microbial engineering, geochemical environment manipulation, and also AI-guided design, and so on. This is just one of the examples. We don't have to go into details. And of course, all of this is feasible. This is not saying that this is what the AI can do, but at this stage, even at using AI agent that is very generic, we can propose some kind of research designs to help us with the more specific problems of what we found in soil science. And of course, there are dangers of AI, so we talk about it in our paper. I don't have time to go through it. It's also to do with the transparencies and how we should also look into how we could enhance the new theory and not rely on the existing data and not rely on the AI itself. Finally, it's a combination of machine learning and domain knowledge will develop meaningful models in soil science. And AI is a continuing and is a very fast evolving discipline, and there should be a lot of potential applications in soil science. And one thing is that AI, we should view it as an augmentative partner, not a replacement for human-led discovery. And finally, as a quote from Andy Clark, one of a philosopher from UK, and he just published recently a point of view that the AI enable us to see beyond some of the prejudice and blind spot that have been hiding important new ways of thinking. So, for example, the example that I gave you on the mineral-associated organic carbon, I asked the AI to look into literatures that are not non-soil science literature, and it is able to pull up some of the literature that we rarely look into. And that's probably one of the strengths of the AI. But the opposite is also true, that if everyone's using the AI and never check anything, what we call monoculture, that everything will be the similar what the AI has presented. And this is a couple of papers, and the first paper is more about the machine learning, how we include soil science information in the machine learning. And the second paper, which I discovered about the applications and future applications of AI in soil science. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Budiman. That was a game changer, I think, in how we can conduct soil science. And Laura's talk was a game changer in how we understand carbon within UK soils as well. So now we're up to the point of the Q&A session. I noticed a few people have already started putting questions into the question box, which I'm going to move into now. But if you'd like to ask any question, please put that into the chat, and I will then start fielding the questions directly for you. If you can put down the name of who you're asking the question to, please do that as well. I can probably guess for most of them, but just to help you out as well. So just to start off, Johan Voss was first off the mark in putting some questions in. I'm going to summarize all his questions in just one, and this goes to Laura. And essentially, you mentioned that you were measuring down to 15 centimeters depth, and Johan has just raised comments about the effects of cover crops and also just deeper storage of carbon. And I know you've answered those questions, Laura, in the question box, but I don't know if you'd like to elaborate on that and how that may affect the results that you've collected.
Yeah, so I mean, I was actually in the process of writing another answer to one of his other questions on a similar topic. But yeah, so there are a lot of logistical issues for us for sampling deeper than 15 centimeters or deeper than topsoil, simply because of the spatial scale of the survey that we do. We have some surveyors up in the Scottish Highlands that hike for most of a day to get to the site. So if they're carrying more kit to get to those sites and collecting more soil, that becomes hugely logistically challenging. Although it is something we're constantly looking at whether we can make possible, because we completely understand that, going to depth can tell us more things. I think in the arable context, we're not trying to precisely quantify the full extent of a change to depth, right? That's not what the survey is trying to do. But what we would say is that changes in topsoil that you see, especially in arable systems, are typically very representative of any changes that you would see to depth. It's the site where you're going to get the most dramatic changes. Obviously, cover crops are going to also be putting a lot of carbon deeper down, especially if they're deeper rooted, and we will be missing that. But I think that the data we show is still a really positive sign for topsoils, especially where that's a lot of crops are rooting as well, and it has a major impact on soil functionality. So obviously, we're not saying we're quantifying all of the carbon change that has happened, and hopefully that further work can look at that.
Great. So what I'm going to do is try to rotate between both speakers. So I'm going to pass one over to Budiman now, and it's from Grant Campbell, and it's quite a philosophical question on how significant do you think that the involvement of AI is going to be in the future in long-term soil monitoring? So is this going to be something that's going to dictate how we do policy and how we look at monitoring in the future?
Yes, if you can hear me. Yes. Yeah. Monitoring. I think AI is more for. I would see it as more to help us. I think integrate more of the data, integrate more of the disparate data and all the information. I think that is probably going to be one of the things that the AI can do. I'm not sure if it can dictate what we're going to monitor. I think it probably can help us make our job easier by because at the moment there are disparate sorts of information, and it's very difficult to harmonize all this different information. I think what the AI can do is to help us do our job easier.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. And I'm going to pass one back to Laura now, and I'm going to actually add a bit onto this. It's from David Purdy, who asked about how to factor in differences in bulk densities due to tillage methods. And I want to also ask whether or not tillage and the change to shallow cultivation might be driving a lot of what you observed.
Yeah. So in terms of accounting for the differences in bulk density between sites, we do calculate bulk density for each core that we get. So when we're calculating carbon stock, we're using a bulk density that is appropriate for that site. But obviously, you know, there's been a lot of literature on the challenges of fixed depth sampling and what that means for interpreting changes in carbon stocks. What we have done is, so obviously, if you imagine there has been, and tillage is one of the main possible drivers of this, right? If you're looking at that list of potential sustainable land managements and things that people have been implementing at wider scale, tillage is very much in both those categories. And what you could see in that is, in one hand, you're getting less disturbance, so you're seeing additional carbon preserved in the soil. And we do know that if you then revert to conventional tillage, you can quite easily lose those benefits at some period, and that does have to happen sometimes for weed management and things like that. What you might also be getting is, if you are reducing the amount of tillage, you would be seeing possibly increased vertical stratification in the amount of carbon that you're getting in the soil. So you're seeing, when you till, you're sort of homogenizing that system. But if you're tilling less, then you're going to get more carbon at the top where all of the vegetation matter and the majority of fine roots are, and then less going down. And so it's possible that that is something we're seeing, but we have done some additional calculations to show that if, in sort of the worst case, most extreme scenario, if you are getting that increased stratification where, you know, the kind of magnitudes you would see in the most extreme scenario we could come up with, where that change in bulk density means that the soil that you're, it's kind of complicated to explain, and I'm not doing it very well. But if you imagine that you have, if you've changed your tillage practices and your soil is, well, that change in bulk density, let's focus on that. So if you have a soil that is now less dense, some of that volume you sampled before has effectively disappeared out the bottom of your core, so you're sampling less soil mass. And if that soil is also vertically stratified, it's possible the soil that you're no longer picking up had less carbon in it. And that might be why, on average, your concentration has gone up. Now, we've done some tests to say that even if that soil that we're effectively not sampling had no carbon in it at all, so the most extreme bias scenario, it couldn't possibly explain the trends that we're seeing. So there's definitely additional carbon has been added to the soil. It's not an artifact of decreasing bulk density in that way. That was a little bit of a roundabout tour of a few things that bounce around in my head in this topic. So if I didn't answer your question, let me know, and I'll go back to whatever is needed. Apologies.
Great. We've gone past 11 o'clock, which was the end time for the webinar. But if people are willing to stay on, we'll still ask a few questions. I'm going to ask one more of Budiman. There is a question I'm saving for the end for him. But this one is from Dominic Bittner, and it's, how do you think AI can be used in applications for smallholder farmers, particularly in low and middle income countries?
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, I think one of the application is that people have been looking at, and I'm not sure it's going to be helpful or not, is the virtual agronomist or virtual extension officer. I think in a lot of part of the world where agronomists or extensions officers are not available, so can AI replace or at least give some general advice? But I think it needs to be customized or tailored to the condition, because generic information are probably not going to be very useful. But I think that somewhere tailored towards the tailored towards the region. I think there are some trials already. At least I think some parts of in India and some parts in Africa, they have tried it and using AI because nowadays people have the mobile phone and it can be used either an app or even a WhatsApp application that can be used to help provide some advice for smallholder farmers.
Great, thank you. So this is the last question for Laura, and I know she's answered it, but I'll ask it so the wider audience can hear it. So this is from Richard Hartnip, and in your presentation, you spoke a lot about cropland, and he raises that in West Wales, there's been a huge recent loss in organic matter associated with windfall and extensive felling of trees. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, so those kinds of changes can take a little bit of time to show up in our national monitoring data that we're reporting, but we have recently published the update to the national reporting for Wales using our sister survey, the ERAMMP survey, Environmental, Rural Affairs and Monitoring and Modelling Programme. It's a real mouthful, so we'll stick with ERAMMP. But that report is available online, and I'll try and stick a link in the chat for people who are interested. But that does show that we see a decrease in the carbon content of broadleaf woodland topsoils in Wales. Now, there's a lot of caveats to put to that, not only because it's topsoil, and especially in woody dominated areas, you expect most of those changes that you would see to be much deeper. So topsoils may well even not be representative of the overall change that we're seeing in the soil column in woodland. That being said, the woodlands in Wales are under a lot of pressure, not just from windfall, but also, there's a lot of changes to do with the aging woodland in the area, and ash dieback we think is also having a big effect in some places. So there's lots of things going on in Welsh woodland. Yeah, and it's definitely one of the things that we're watching.
Great, thanks very much. I appreciate that people have things to do and places to go, so this is going to be the last question. One of the things that we publish in the European Journal of Soil Science are commentary articles, where people will write their views on particular discoveries or the way that science is going. So the last one I'm going to ask is from Philippe Bevet, and I'm going to read it out verbatim, but it's for Budiman. So it's various authors have pointed out that chatbots like ChatGPT hallucinate in literature searches, i.e. they invent totally fake articles. Is there a risk, therefore, that AI would propel us into a fake world where suggestions of AI for future research would be entirely ludicrous?
Yes, thank you. Yes, that is one of the, depending on what type of AI, I think there are like a large language model. It's well known for you're not meant to use large language models for research because it has a limited database and it likes to create its own research literature. But what we are talking about is more of an AI agent where it looks into the literature, not into the general database. But of course, all of this there are caveats and researchers. As researchers, we are meant to be using AI as a tool, as a helping tool, not as the main source of information. That is the task of the scientists to go through and to have the knowledge base to look into the proposal or to look into the proposals and hypotheses to judge whether it's feasible or it's out of the question.
Great, thanks very much, Budiman. And just on behalf of the British Society of Soil Science, I want to thank both Laura Bentley and Budiman Minasny for coming along to present their work today. And also to all of you, thank you very much for attending as well. So when you leave the webinar, you're going to see a quick feedback survey. So if you can please fill that out, that will help us considerably in organizing webinars in the future. The recording of this webinar will also be made available after the event on our YouTube channel. And the next webinar is scheduled to take place in the second week of June, and it's going to be led by Rothamsted Research. So keep an eye on the British Society of Soil Science website, and also you should receive a follow-up email for more details as well. And also, I just want you to note that our annual and early career conferences are coming up in early December in Manchester. The abstract submissions are open for both of those, and you can find details again on our website as well. So I hope to see many of you at future events, but in the meantime, thank you very much and goodbye.